Hello everyone, and welcome back to another weather update. Tonight we're going to be talking about the severe weather risk across parts of the central United States, and then we'll be looking at tomorrow's severe weather risk across parts of the Midwest United States. And then towards the latter part of the video, we'll be talking about the potential for a tropical cyclone possibly into early next week, the formation of one early into next week, into kind of the middle parts or latter parts of next week. But we'll really be breaking that down and making that a separate part of the video. But first we'll start off with the severe weather risk for today. So looking here at the day one convective outlook, and this was just updated just a few minutes ago, and this is the latest 01Z update, the night update. And so here we have our severe weather risk for tonight, and it has been downgraded. There was a slight risk here, but it has been downgraded to just a marginal risk, and this marginal risk is all the way from parts of North Dakota into Minnesota, all the way down to the south into the panhandle of Texas here. There is a tornado risk with this marginal risk only in the northern part, and that is from North Dakota all the way to the south into eastern South Dakota, and then into kind of northeastern Nebraska, then into northwestern Iowa, and then into parts of western Minnesota there. Then with our wind risk, that extends all the way from North Dakota and Minnesota down to the south, all the way into parts of the panhandle of Texas. Then with our hail risk, same with that. That extends all the way from North Dakota and Minnesota all the way down into the panhandle of Texas. Looking at the south central United States, and then we'll move up to the north central United States in just a second on the 0ZHRRR, and this run is still coming in, so it only goes 11 hours out. But when we look at the severe weather threat for tomorrow, we'll be using the 18Z HRRR and probably the 18Z 3-kilometer nav for that. But first, looking here, and actually before I start, I did forget to mention that there are chapters in the video, timestamps, same thing, that are spread out in the video, so y'all can go to any part of the video y'all want to see. So if y'all want to go to the severe weather part, y'all can click on that in the description and it should take you there. And if y'all want to see just the tropical weather part of the video, y'all can go to that part, and just feel free to do that if y'all want to. But going back to this, looking at the 0ZHRRR, there are a few storms really kind of into the panhandle of Texas, just some small storms that do have the potential to produce some damaging winds and a little bit of a hail risk with that as well. But those will kind of continue, and some may kind of linger around and not really develop any further over the next couple of hours, and just basically just linger around and eventually weaken. And then looking farther to the north here into Kansas, we'll go back here, you will have some storms that continue to develop, and some may try to develop here into Kansas and then into Nebraska. But the HRRR does not show really many storms going into Kansas, but a few stronger ones into Nebraska for later into the night over the next several hours. And then we'll look at instability real quick, and so you'll lose most of the instability, especially in Oklahoma, and those storms will move to the east of that instability and just weaken as you go farther into the evening and night. But then we'll look at our northern sector here, and we'll also look at the tornado risk for some of the areas. So going back to the radar here on the 0ZHRRR, again, you will have those storms kind of move into Nebraska, and then maybe a few into Iowa right here, and then a few look to be kind of strong into Nebraska over the next couple of hours, and then into early tomorrow on Thursday. And then you have more development of storms maybe into southeastern South Dakota, into Nebraska again very early tomorrow morning. and then you will have some more that to continue to move into Iowa there, and then a few even into Minnesota as well, and those continue into basically tomorrow morning. And then we'll go back here and look at instability. And so you do have quite a bit of instability, especially into Minnesota and South Dakota, and that will kind of confine into a smaller area, and that will continue to kind of go north there. And then we'll look at our low level, we'll look at our moisture actually real quick, our dew points here. And so you have a wide area of pretty rich moisture here, and your dew points will start to lower throughout the next several hours, and you'll lose some of that instability in that instability that is from some of the heating from today. But going back here to our low level jet, we'll go back and go farther right here, but that low level jet will start to strengthen, and you might have a period kind of later over the next couple of hours that you'll have that little bit of a potential for a tornado or two. But that low level jet in the area with some of that instability just kind of weakens out as you get into early tomorrow. And we'll look here, we'll go back to right here where low level jet's pretty strong. You do have a basically a 30 to 40 knot low level jet into parts of northeastern South Dakota and Minnesota, as well as some of that instability there. And we'll look at the radar again. And so you may have a few storms that try to get going here, but if they do get going, they will have that little bit of a chance of producing a tornado. But again, the risk is only a 2%, so there isn't a large, or not a large, but a potent risk for tornadoes, but still that risk is there for that area. Now looking at tomorrow's severe weather risk for the day 2 outlook, and this is for Thursday, September the 19th, 2024. And we do have a slight risk here into parts of eastern Minnesota, northern Iowa, and western Wisconsin, and a marginal risk around that all the way from Minnesota and Wisconsin all the way down to the south into parts of central and northern Oklahoma. And then looking at our tornado risk, we do have a 5% tornado risk, mainly into eastern Minnesota and northwestern Wisconsin. Around that is a 2% from northeastern Kansas all the way to the north into parts of Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa, and northwestern Missouri. We do have a wind risk with this. We do have a 15% wind risk, same areas as that slight risk into eastern Wisconsin, eastern Minnesota, northwestern Wisconsin, into Iowa, and then around that is a 5% all the way from parts of Oklahoma to the north to Minnesota and Wisconsin. And then with our hail risk, we do have a 15% risk here into Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, and we also do have a hatched risk here with these dashed lines, and that means a 10% or greater probability of 2-inch diameter hail or larger within 25 miles of a point in this hatched risk with the black dashed lines. And so that 15%, the area is in parts of the 15%, but not the entire 15%, mainly into parts of western Wisconsin and far eastern Minnesota, and then that 15% around that extends all the way into Iowa. Same thing with that 5%. There's not a hatch risk in that area, but a 5% is all the way from Minnesota and Wisconsin down to the south into parts of southeastern Kansas and then into Missouri for tomorrow. First, we'll be looking at the HRRR, and the 0Z run is coming out right now, so I'll only be able to go out so far with this run. But again, we will look at this to begin with, and we'll switch back to the 18Z in just a second. But going back to very early tomorrow morning, you'll have some storms that kind of get going again into maybe places into Iowa, Nebraska, maybe South Dakota, and then you'll have this morning band of storms and some clusters here into parts of Missouri, Iowa, Minnesota, even into parts of Wisconsin. And those will move through in the morning tomorrow on Thursday. and those will continue to go east, and then we'll refresh again, see if we can get any further. So go out a little further here, and those will continue east, but those will eventually weaken out through the morning and early afternoon hours tomorrow, and then we'll go back to the 18Z so we can see farther out. Same thing here, we'll have those storms kind of continuing east, and then you'll have this additional band of storms that develop into Minnesota and then eventually into Wisconsin and Iowa, and this is going to be your main threat for tomorrow, with that little bit of a tornado risk in these areas, as well as that wind and hail risk for some of these areas. And so you'll have those main storms getting going, initial storms getting going into Minnesota and Wisconsin, and then you go into tomorrow afternoon and evening, and you get these clusters really beginning to form into Minnesota and Iowa. And going further into the day, into tomorrow, kind of later tomorrow evening, you get these nasty storms really forming here into Wisconsin and southern and southeastern Minnesota, and then into Iowa. Those continue east throughout the next couple of hours, the next few hours after kind of going into the nighttime hours. And so you have this band moving through Wisconsin. Well, this will probably be responsible for that wind risk, and then you also have that hail risk associated with these storms as well. And those will continue to track to the east and southeast, and those will move eventually throughout Wisconsin, Iowa, even into parts of Missouri, and you will have some additional storms that develop into Kansas and into Missouri later into the day. But you may have a few storms get going into Missouri kind of later tomorrow afternoon and evening, and then those go away. Then you might have another additional round into Missouri and Kansas later tomorrow night, and then into early on Friday, and those will move to the east. And you could still have some strong storms, especially into Missouri here, that show up, but those should really begin to weaken. Most of the severe storms should be pretty much out by early Friday morning. And then we'll go back here and look at our low level jet. And so this is going to be one of the major things to watch here with this low level jet and this instability. So you do have this low level jet that begins to increase in speed in the lower levels, and so you'll have a stronger low level jet as you go kind of throughout the day. And so really the area we may need to watch is basically later tomorrow into the evening hours into Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Iowa with that tornado risk, because you do have a not a very strong low level jet, but a sufficient low level jet for tornado development. And though you will have quite a bit of instability into these areas, so there will be that hail risk with these storms, as well as that wind risk. But the hail threat will also be something to definitely watch out for if you live in these areas, because of that instability into some of these areas. And we'll look at dew points real quick here. And so really what these storms are going to do is they're going to try to form on this moist boundary between not really dry air, but less just air that's not quite as moist as the area into the moist sector here. And so you're going to have these storms that basically form on this boundary. And we'll look back at the radar. So as you can see right here, here's kind of the boundary, and you can probably see kind of some of those storms eventually get going right here. And then we'll go back to that dew point right here. And so just right ahead of this boundary, you're going to have storms beginning to form and really get going here. And then you'll have those move to the east. But also it'll be something else to watch is the storms that get going into the morning hours tomorrow. So the quicker these storms can move out and this air destabilizes behind it, basically to the west, you will have a lot more, not a lot more, but more areas that will have stronger storms, because the area is able to recover from the morning storms, and you'll have that instability that builds back into the areas. So again, the quicker the morning storms can move out, the quicker and stronger these storms will be able to build into the evening hours tomorrow on Thursday. And lastly, looking at the day 3 severe thunderstorm outlook, and so we just have general thunderstorm risk across not much, but parts of the central U.S. as well as the Midwestern and Southwest United States, and then into parts of the Southeastern United States. But again, no severe weather is expected at this time besides general thunderstorms in some of these areas. Lastly, we'll be looking at the tropics and mainly discussing this area down here into the Caribbean. But first, we'll look at this area, and this is the remnants of Gordon, of what was tropical storm Gordon. And so the remnants of Gordon do have a 50% chance of developing into a tropical cyclone within the next 7 days. But the models aren't really picking up on this system again, but still we'll look at it. We'll look at it in just a second, but we'll look at the remnants of Gordon first before we look at this area. But this area down here into the Caribbean, last night the National Hurricane Center did not have an area of interest or area of possible development out into the 7-day outlook. But today they did add this area into the Caribbean and then into parts of the Gulf of Mexico. But it does have a 30% chance of developing into a tropical cyclone within the next 7 days. But in just a second, we'll be looking at the models and really breaking down the system and what might happen with this system. But this area definitely needs to be watched over the next several days and into next week. But I personally think this area could be a major problem for some of the areas into the Caribbean, but mainly the continental United States. But we'll look at the models in just a second. First, looking at the remnants of Gordon and looking at the 18Z GFS, as you can see up here. So here is the remnants from Gordon, and so the GFS doesn't really have a lot going on with the system, and it kind of has this low out here, but this is the remnants, and so it has a low forming pretty much to the west of the remnants, and then you get this other low that forms, and this would be Gordon here, and you have two areas of low pressure, and they just don't really get going and eventually just move on out to the north. But again, the reason behind really why the remnants would not get going is because there's just a lot of dry air, and that eventually gets into the more moist air, and that would just really limit it from forming and intensifying any further. And again, we'll look at the European model here, and so same thing with the European, has it kind of splitting, and then you have these two areas of low pressure, and those eventually just linger around and eventually move on out here to the north. But again, nothing really major that has changed with the remnants of Gordon. Now switching to the Western Atlantic and focusing on the area into the Caribbean and parts of the Gulf. So first we'll be looking at the GEFS ensemble, and again, if y'all didn't watch my last video, it is basically just an kind of an average of individual members put together, and so we can basically get an average from this model, and get a better look at where areas might have a chance of developing further into a system. And so it just gives us an idea of where another system might form compared to looking at the GFS, the operational run, instead. But so again, first we'll be looking at the GEFS ensemble, and so looking over the next couple of days, and you start to see this area of lighter color here, kind of a green looking here. And so it's kind of hard to see, but you can see these red numbers, and that represents areas of lower pressure. And so you go into this coming weekend and you kind of have that area getting lighter and getting more of a green color compared to a darker blue like you could see up here. And the blue is areas of higher pressure. And so you go into early next week and that signal really starts to increase, and you see not quite a few, but at least a couple members here showing low pressure. And then you get more members that hook onto the signal, and then by early next week you have a pretty strong signal showing up here into the Caribbean. And then even into the middle of next week you get a very strong signal showing up on the GEFS ensemble here. And past here we just have quite a few members going out, and you can see this major signal here into the Gulf. But really after 200 hours is not as reliable, but definitely a signal showing up here with these members. And so this is the area that is again highlighted by the National Hurricane Center, and we'll just have to really go day by day and just look at this area and see how confidence may increase or decrease with this system. But again, it's just an area we'll have to continue to watch for potential development. And so instead of going to the EPS ensemble, the European ensemble, we'll go to the GFS, the operational model here. And so the 18Z GFS does show that area eventually getting going, and then going basically right to the west of Cuba, and then it has it going into the Gulf and to the east of the Yucatan Peninsula, and then going into the middle of the Gulf, and then going farther and then making a landfall as a hurricane. But again, this will be 240 hours out, so that is way far out for us to even consider looking at. But the really just looking farther than 170 hours, to me 170 hours out is pretty unpredictable and unreliable really. But inside about 140 to 120 is the safe area, to me at least. But still we have this low pressure forming there, and then that will get on out into the Gulf from the GFS there. And this will be the worst case scenario, but this is the scenario that I'm worried about the most, honestly, because this low, if it were to form, it would just get into the Gulf with very warm waters, and just a prime area for development with any tropical cyclone. But now we'll look at the EPS ensemble, and we'll look at the same thing, the ensemble members. And so the GFS also shows a signal here as we get into early next week. It's not as potent of a signal, but you still have that signal showing up into the Caribbean and then eventually the Gulf. But again, the European has more of a stronger signal to the east into the eastern Gulf, but still that signal is there with the EPS ensemble. And then we'll go to the European now, the European operational run. And we'll first look at the 12, well, actually we'll look at the 18Z run. And so as you can see, we'll go actually to here. So this only goes to 90 hours out, but you can see all that moisture down there into the Caribbean. And then we'll go to the 12Z. And so eventually has that moisture kind of going to the north just a little bit, and you may have a low pressure getting formed that will form, but could form into the Gulf here. And the European doesn't have it nearly as strong as what the GFS showed, but still this is very far out and unreliable with this range. So we'll really have to watch over the next several days. And I would say as we get into this weekend will be the big days for kind of figuring out how the system or where it might go. But we'll go to we'll go back to the GFS here, and we'll go to this to show how much the runs change. We'll go to 240 hours out here, and so we'll go to the previous run, and so it has a hurricane out here off the coast of the southeast. Go back another run, doesn't even have it there. Go back again, you have a hurricane way out here. So as y'all can tell, it is pretty unreliable once you get that far out. But even if you go to 144 hours out, it's still a little bit unreliable. But the areas that are shown are in generally the same location as before, if that makes sense. But now we'll go back, we'll stay on the GFS here. And so one of the things, this is just me personally, but one of the things I'm worried about if this system were to get in the Gulf is, we'll look at this dry air here and the moisture. So you can see this large area of moisture, and this would be our area to watch over the next week or two. And so, or pretty much week and a half. But you're going to have this system, this low pressure into the central United States that moves most of this, not most, but it kind of picks up this dry air into the Gulf and but carries it basically to the north. And so you can see this best on the latest GFS here. And so that dry air is basically picked up with that low pressure system into the United States. And so that gets picked up. And so you have this area of not very moist air, but moist air in front of the system. And so it just enters a great environment for development on the GFS. I'm not saying this is going to happen, but that dry air is just picked up by that system, and so it's not going to enter an area really that is unfavorable for development. And quickly we'll look at shear here. And so just looking at the GFS specifically, you're not going to have really any shear affecting the storm, and you're going to have a favorable environment. And even if you go to we'll go to right over the next couple of days into this weekend, this area into the Caribbean, it's not going to have a lot of shear. It is going to have some, but it's going to enter a period maybe this weekend where it has little to no shear, and that'll be an area to watch into the weekend. But that is just my main concerns with this system. And so we'll look at the European real quick as well, going back to it, and looking at the 12Z run here. Same thing, we'll go to the dry air here. And so the European does have that dry air there as well, like the GFS. And then you have this low pressure up into the central United States that moves to the north, and that dry air is basically carried to the north. And then you have an area, this doesn't show up as well on the European, but it's still there, where that dry air gets basically pushed up to the north, and that moist air is able to head into the Gulf of Mexico. And lastly, we'll actually look at the Canadian model real quick and the Icon model, just to compare those two really quickly. But again, look at the Canadian. I have not looked at the Canadian today, so it'll be the first time I'm looking at it. But the Canadian does have, this is the 12Z run, by the way. The Canadian does have that getting into the Gulf, and then eventually a hurricane, and that would hit into maybe the southeast United States. I mean, not the southeast, but into the panhandle of Florida there. But again, that's just too far out to really tell at this range. So we'll look at the Icon as well and see what it shows. And so looking at the 18Z Icon, this really won't go out far enough, but you still do have that moisture there into the Caribbean. Then looking at the 12Z run, it does have a low pressure developing, and that would go kind of into the Yucatan Peninsula, similar to what the European shows, and then eventually get a low pressure out into the middle of the Gulf of Mexico. But again, this will be an area that we'll need to continue to watch over the next several days into next week. But that'll be it for the weather models. So that's going to be it for tonight's video. I do really appreciate all of y'all watching, and everyone who clicked on my video. And I also really appreciate all the support I've been getting for some of the recent videos I've been posting, and definitely consider subscribing if y'all want to see more videos like this one and more forecasts. Also consider liking the video if you liked it, or disliking it if you disliked it. But obviously I would much rather have y'all like the video. But it would definitely help me just to grow the channel, because that's the main thing I'm trying to do now, is just continue to grow the channel. But again, I do appreciate all y'all watching, and I hope y'all have a great night, and I think I'll try to make another video tomorrow, but I can't guarantee it again. But I have been on a streak where I've uploaded consecutively, so I am happy about that. If I could get on a schedule like this where I could upload and have a more consistent schedule, I really would like that. But again, that'll be it for this video, and I hope y'all have a great rest of y'all's night.